You know what? Let me tell you about something that went down on NBA Today yesterday that honestly had me on the edge of my seat, and I'm not even exaggerating when I say this could be the most important Lakers storyline heading into the trade deadline. I'm sitting there watching, expecting the usual breakdown of last night's games, maybe some playoff positioning talk, and then Malika Andrews drops this bomb about Keon Ellis and the Lakers, and suddenly the entire energy in the studio shifted. You could feel it. This wasn't just another trade rumor segment where they throw names at the wall to fill airtime. This felt urgent. This felt real. This felt like the kind of move that could legitimately define whether the Lakers are serious championship contenders or just another team that's going to flame out in the first or second round because they didn't have the courage to address their glaring weaknesses. Hey, what's up, everyone? 1 second before we dive in, that like button right there, hit it now. Takes literally 1 second, but makes a massive difference in growing this channel and reaching more fans. Just smash that like real quick. Every like pushes this video further, so do me that favor right now. So the show opens up, and they've got this massive graphic on the screen showing the Lakers' defensive metrics compared to the rest of the league, and immediately you can see the problem they're trying to solve. The starting lineup is absolutely elite offensively. We're talking best offensive unit in the entire NBA by a significant margin, which makes sense when you've got LeBron and AD and Austin Reeves and all these weapons. But then they flip to the bench numbers, and it's like looking at two completely different teams. The bench offense is legitimately the worst in basketball, like statistically the absolute bottom of the barrel. But here's the twist that makes the Keon Ellis situation so fascinating. The Lakers' bench defense is actually one of the best in the league. So you've got this bizarre situation where they need to find someone who can bridge that gap, someone who can provide offense without completely destroying the defensive identity they've built with that second unit. And that's when they start showing Keon Ellis highlights from this season with Sacramento. And I'm telling you, every single person on that panel was nodding their heads because this dude is exactly what the Lakers need. And then some. We're talking about a legitimate 3-and-D wing who's shooting over 40% from three-point range, who can defend positions 1 through 3 at an elite level, who has the athleticism and versatility to fit into any system, and who's young enough at 25 years old that he's still developing and hasn't hit his ceiling yet. The way they broke down his defensive possessions was absolutely eye-opening, because it's not just that he's a good defender, it's that he understands angles and positioning and help rotations in a way that usually takes guys years to develop. He's not just chasing guys around the perimeter, he's 2 steps ahead mentally, and that's the kind of basketball IQ that translates immediately to winning basketball. But here's where the conversation on NBA Today got really interesting, and this is the part that had me completely locked in. They brought in Brian Windhorst, and he starts talking about the broader context of why this trade makes so much sense from both sides and the leverage dynamics at play. Sacramento has been trying to move pieces around all season because they're stuck in this weird middle ground where they're not bad enough to tank, but they're clearly not good enough to compete with the elite teams in the West. Keon Ellis is a restricted free agent at the end of this season, making only $2.3 million, which means he's going to get offers that Sacramento might not want to match. So from their perspective, trading him now while they can get something back makes way more sense than letting him walk for nothing in the offseason. And the Lakers, they're in this win-now mode where every single season matters, because LeBron's not getting any younger, and AD's injury history means you can never assume you'll have another opportunity. So, overpaying slightly in terms of draft capital to get a guy who fits perfectly is actually the smart move, even if it stings a little bit to give up assets. The panel started getting into potential trade packages, and this is where you could see everyone's wheels turning, because there are so many different ways to structure this deal depending on what Sacramento values. The most straightforward version would involve the Lakers sending out multiple second-round picks, and maybe a young player like Jalen Hood-Schifino, who hasn't really gotten opportunities in LA's rotation, but could get more developmental minutes in Sacramento's system. But then, they threw out this wild idea that actually makes a ton of sense when you think about it. What if the Lakers took on Malik Monk's contract as part of the deal? And suddenly, everyone in the studio perked up, because now you're talking about a completely different level of transaction that solves multiple problems for both teams simultaneously. Let me explain why the Malik Monk angle is so brilliant, and this is something they spent probably 15 minutes breaking down on the show, because the implications are huge. Sacramento has been trying to move Monk since the offseason, because they've got too much money tied up in their backcourt, and his contract doesn't really align with their timeline. But here's the thing. Most teams don't need a $19 million sixth man who's best with the ball in his hands, running pick and roll and creating his own shot. Most contenders already have that guy, or they've structured their roster in a way where that role doesn't exist. But the Lakers desperately need bench scoring. They need someone who can come in when LeBron sits and actually run an offense without everything grinding to a halt. Malik Monk averaged over 15 points per game last season, and he's a guy with legitimate playoff experience who's performed in high-pressure situations. And even more importantly, he's got Lakers experience from earlier in his career, so he knows what it's like playing under those bright lights and handling that media scrutiny. The way the panel broke it down, and I think this is where the genius of the potential trade really shines through, is that by taking on Monk's contract, the Lakers could actually use that as leverage to get Keon Ellis for cheaper in terms of the draft capital they'd have to surrender. Sacramento gets to clear significant salary off their books. They get some future picks to help with their rebuild or retool or whatever direction they're heading. And the Lakers get two players who address their two biggest weaknesses, which are perimeter defense and bench scoring. It's one of those rare trades where you can legitimately argue both sides won, which is why it has a real chance of actually happening, unlike 90% of the trade rumors you hear this time of year that are just agents posturing or media members throwing stuff out there for clicks. Now, let's talk about fit, because this is where things get really interesting from a pure basketball perspective. And the NBA Today crew spent a solid chunk of time exploring exactly how Keon Ellis would be deployed in Darvin Ham's system. The starting lineup probably stays the same initially, because you don't want to mess with chemistry when you've got the best offensive unit in basketball, but Ellis would immediately become the first wing off the bench and probably close games in crunch time, depending on matchups. Imagine a closing lineup in a playoff series where you've got LeBron, AD, Austin Reeves, and then you can flexibly slot in either Keon Ellis when you need lockdown perimeter defense against a Luka, or a Booker, or a Steph, or you can bring in Malik Monk when you need additional shot creation and scoring punch. That kind of flexibility is what separates championship teams from pretenders, because you're not locked into one style of play. You can adapt based on what the opponent is giving you. The defensive versatility that Ellis brings is something they really emphasized on the show, and I think this is being underrated in a lot of the trade discussions I've seen online. He's not just a guy who can guard point guards or shooting guards. He's legitimately switchable 1 through 3 and can even handle some smaller fours in a pinch. That means when the Lakers go to their switching scheme in the playoffs, which they inevitably will because AD and LeBron are both comfortable switching, you don't have that weak link that opposing offenses can hunt possession after possession. Right now, when guys like Austin Reeves or D'Angelo Russell are on the floor, smart teams just run action after action to get those guys in isolation and make them defend in space. And while Reeves has improved defensively, he's never going to be a stopper. Ellis changes that calculus completely because suddenly you can have him glued to the opponent's best perimeter scorer all game long, while your offensive players can focus on what they do best on the other end. But let me address something that came up on NBA Today that I think is a legitimate concern, and it's something Lakers fans need to be realistic about. If they make this trade and bring in both Ellis and Monk, there's going to be a transition period where everyone figures out their roles, and the offense might look a bit clunky for a few weeks. Malik Monk is used to having the ball in his hands a lot. He's used to being a primary initiator and shot creator, and in LA, he's going to have to adjust to playing more off the ball and picking his spots. The panel had a really interesting discussion about whether Darvin Ham would actually let Monk cook when he's on the floor with the second unit, or if they'd just stick him in the corner and turn him into a spot-up shooter, which would be a complete waste of his talents, and the reason why trading for him wouldn't make sense in the first place. Windhorst made a great point about this that really resonated with me, and I think it speaks to a broader issue with how the Lakers have operated recently. He said that if you're going to trade for a player like Malik Monk, who has a specific skill set built around shot creation and on-ball playmaking, you have to actually commit to using him that way and trusting him to make plays. You can't bring in a guy making $19 million and then just relegate him to standing in the corner waiting for kickouts, because at that point, you might as well trade for a cheaper 3-and-D specialist who fits that role better. The Lakers have to be willing to stagger their stars' minutes so that when LeBron sits, you've got Monk running pick and roll with AD, and when AD sits, you've got Monk running two-man game with LeBron. And in those bench-heavy lineups, you've got Monk as the primary ball handler creating for himself and others. If they're not willing to do that, then this trade doesn't make sense, and they should focus on pure 3-and-D guys instead. The timing aspect of all this is crucial too, and they spent time on NBA Today breaking down the urgency from LA's perspective. We're approaching the trade deadline, and the Lakers are sitting in that weird middle ground of the Western Conference standing, where they're good enough to make the playoffs, but not good enough to scare anybody once they get there. Every game matters right now because seeding is going to determine matchups, and the difference between playing the Nuggets in the first round versus the second round could literally be the difference between making the conference finals and going home early. They need to make a move soon so that whoever they acquire has time to integrate into the system and build chemistry before the playoffs start. You can't just make a trade 3 days before the deadline and expect guys to be on the same page immediately in high-leverage playoff situations. The show also touched on something that I think is fascinating from a long-term perspective beyond just this season. If the Lakers bring in Keon Ellis and he performs well, they're going to have to make a decision about matching whatever offer sheet he signs in restricted free agency this summer. And that could get expensive real quick if he has a strong playoff performance and other teams fall in love with him. But here's the thing, and this is where the front office decision-making gets really interesting. Ellis is exactly the type of player you want to pay because he fits the modern NBA prototype perfectly. And he's young enough that he'll still be in his prime when this current core ages out. Guys who can shoot threes at a high volume and elite percentage, while also defending multiple positions, are worth their weight in gold in today's league. And if the Lakers can lock him up long-term at a reasonable number, that's the kind of asset that makes your team better for years to come, not just one playoff run. What really struck me watching NBA Today break all this down is how much this trade represents a philosophical shift for the Lakers in terms of how they're thinking about roster construction. For years, they've been chasing the big names, the flashy signings, the moves that generate headlines and sell tickets, even if they don't necessarily make basketball sense. But this is smart, calculated, strategic team building, where you're identifying specific weaknesses in your roster and targeting the exact types of players who address those weaknesses without mortgaging your entire future. Keon Ellis isn't going to sell jerseys, he's not going to be on billboards, casual fans might not even know who he is, but basketball people understand that he's exactly what championship teams are built on. Guys who do the dirty work and make winning plays, even if they don't show up in the box score. This is the kind of move that separates well-run organizations from ones that just try to buy championships. And if the Lakers pull this off, it'll be a sign that maybe, just maybe, they've learned from some of their past mistakes and are ready to build something sustainable rather than just chasing short-term glory.